Marcus Thompson had been serving as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for 8 years. His tall frame stood perfectly straight in the iconic red tunic and bearskin hat, a symbol of British tradition that tourists photographed thousands of times each day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus took his position at the main gate, his polished boots clicking against the stone pavement. The job required absolute discipline and unwavering focus. Marcus had trained extensively for this role, mastering the art of remaining motionless for hours while staying alert to any potential threats. His military background in the British Army had prepared him well for the physical and mental demands of protecting the royal family. Every day brought new challenges, from managing curious tourists who tried to make the guards break character to handling actual security concerns. On this particular Tuesday morning, something felt different. Marcus noticed increased police activity around the palace grounds. Radio chatter had been more frequent than usual, and several unmarked vehicles had positioned themselves strategically around the perimeter. His trained eye caught subtle details that ordinary citizens would miss. The way certain officers scanned the crowd more intensely, the positioning of backup units, and the tension in the air that suggested something significant was happening. As the morning progressed, Marcus maintained his stoic expression while internally processing the changing dynamics around him. A group of American tourists approached, snapping photos and making jokes about trying to get a reaction from the statue man. Marcus had heard every variation of these comments over the years, but today his mind was focused on the unusual security patterns he was observing. Around midday, a black SUV pulled up to the palace gates with obvious urgency. Marcus recognized the vehicle type immediately. It belonged to a special operations unit. 3 men in tactical gear emerged, their movements precise and purposeful. The lead officer, a stocky man with a buzz cut and stern expression, approached the guard station where Marcus was positioned. Officer James Rodriguez of the Metropolitan Police SWAT team had been having the worst week of his career. A high-profile operation had gone sideways 3 days earlier, resulting in media criticism and internal investigations. His supervisor had been breathing down his neck, and the pressure was getting to him. The call to respond to a potential security threat at the palace had come at the worst possible time, when his nerves were already frayed and his patience wearing thin. Rodriguez surveyed the scene with growing frustration. The intelligence they had received about a possible threat seemed vague and unsubstantiated. He was beginning to suspect this was another false alarm that would waste valuable resources and further damage his already tarnished reputation. The sight of the ceremonial guards standing in their traditional uniforms while serious police work needed to be done struck him as absurd and outdated. Marcus watched as Rodriguez approached, noting the officer's agitated demeanor and the tension in his shoulders. Something about the man's body language set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. Years of military service had taught him to read people quickly, and this officer seemed like he was operating on a short fuse. "You need to move away from this area immediately," Rodriguez barked at Marcus, his voice carrying an edge of authority mixed with barely contained irritation. "We're conducting a security operation here." Marcus remained in position, following proper protocol. As a royal guard, he was required to maintain his post, unless specifically relieved by his commanding officer or in case of immediate danger. He had received no such orders through official channels, and the approaching SWAT officer, while clearly agitated, had not presented any credentials or formal orders for Marcus to abandon his position. The silence from Marcus only fueled Rodriguez's frustration. In his mind, everyone should immediately comply with law enforcement directives, regardless of their own protocols or chain of command. The fact that this ceremonial guard was essentially ignoring him felt like a personal affront to his authority and professional expertise. "Did you hear me?" Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice rising. "I said move away from this position." We have a potential threat situation here, and I need this area cleared immediately." Marcus remained motionless, his eyes fixed forward in the traditional guard stance. His training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, maintaining discipline and following proper procedures even under pressure. He understood that his role was not just ceremonial, but an integral part of the palace's security apparatus, and abandoning his post without proper authorization would be a serious breach of duty. Rodriguez interpreted Marcus's continued silence as defiance and disrespect. The stress of his recent failures, combined with the pressure of the current situation, reached a boiling point. Without warning, he raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap across Marcus's face, the sound echoing off the palace walls. The strike was more about asserting dominance than causing physical harm, but the implications were enormous. Several tourists witnessed the incident, immediately pulling out their phones to record what they assumed was some kind of training exercise or performance. Security cameras positioned around the palace captured every angle of the encounter, and nearby officers from both the police and palace security forces stopped what they were doing to stare at the unprecedented scene. Marcus felt the sting of the slap but maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Years of discipline prevented him from reacting impulsively, but behind his stoic expression, his mind was processing the situation rapidly. He had just been assaulted by a police officer while performing his lawful duties, and witnesses were present to document the incident. Rodriguez immediately realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. The moment his hand connected with the guard's face, he understood that he had crossed a line that could end his career. The watching crowd, the cameras, and the shocked expressions of his fellow officers all confirmed that his momentary loss of control had just created a situation far worse than any security threat they had been investigating. The palace courtyard fell into an eerie silence as everyone present tried to process what had just occurred. Marcus continued to stand at attention, but subtle changes in his posture indicated that something fundamental had shifted. His military training was taking over, and his mind was already calculating his next moves with the precision and strategic thinking that had made him an exemplary soldier before becoming a royal guard. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Marcus Thompson was not just any ceremonial guard. His background included specialized training in close protection, counterterrorism operations, and diplomatic security. His assignment to the Royal Guard was actually a cover for more sensitive duties that required someone with his specific skill set and security clearance. The man he had just assaulted was far more dangerous and well-connected than his traditional uniform suggested. Marcus slowly turned his head to face Rodriguez directly, breaking his ceremonial stance for the first time in the encounter. The movement was deliberate and controlled, but there was something in his eyes that made the SWAT officer take an involuntary step backward. When Marcus spoke, his voice was calm but carried an underlying steel that commanded immediate attention. "Officer Rodriguez," Marcus said, reading the name tag with perfect clarity, "you have just committed assault against a member of Her Majesty's Guard while on palace grounds. This incident has been recorded by multiple security cameras and witnessed by numerous civilians and law enforcement personnel." Rodriguez's face went pale as he realized that the guard knew his name and was speaking with the authority of someone who clearly understood legal procedures and protocol. This was not the reaction he had expected from what he assumed was just a ceremonial soldier playing dress-up for tourists. Marcus continued speaking in the same measured tone. "According to Section 89 of the Police Act 1996 and the Assault on Emergency Workers Act 2018, your actions constitute a serious criminal offense. Additionally, under the Special Constables Act and the Royal and Parliamentary Titles Act, assault against royal security personnel carries enhanced penalties." The watching tourists had stopped taking selfies and were now focused entirely on the unfolding drama. Several police officers who had been conducting their security sweep had gathered around the scene, unsure whether to intervene or document what was happening. Rodriguez's own team members exchanged worried glances, recognizing that their colleague had potentially destroyed not only his own career, but could implicate their entire unit in the fallout. Furthermore, Marcus added, reaching into his jacket with slow, deliberate movements, I am required to inform you that this incident will be reported through proper channels to both the Metropolitan Police Professional Standards Department and the Serious Crime Division. Rodriguez watched in growing horror as Marcus produced a small recording device and what appeared to be official credentials that were definitely not standard issue for ceremonial guards. The leather wallet contained multiple identification cards, including ones that Rodriguez recognized as belonging to specialized security services that operated well above his clearance level. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I hold the rank of Captain in Her Majesty's Royal Protection Command. My current assignment includes both ceremonial duties and covert security operations for visiting dignitaries and high-value targets. Your assault against me has been recorded, witnessed, and will be processed as an attack against a serving officer engaged in national security operations. The blood drained from Rodriguez's face as the full implications of his actions became clear. He had not just slapped a tourist attraction guard, he had assaulted a highly trained security officer with connections throughout the British intelligence and law enforcement community. The ceremonial position was actually a cover for someone with significantly more authority and training than Rodriguez possessed. Marcus pocketed his credentials and activated his radio with practiced efficiency. Control, this is Thompson at Post 7. I need immediate response from Professional Standards and the duty inspector. We have an assault incident involving a Metropolitan Police SWAT officer. Multiple witnesses and full video documentation available. The radio crackled to life immediately. Copy that, Thompson. Professional Standards and Inspector Morrison are en route. Maintain position and secure all evidence. Rodriguez finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. I didn't know. I thought you were just... The security situation required... Marcus raised a hand to silence him. Officer Rodriguez, I strongly advise you to remain quiet until appropriate legal counsel and your supervisor arrive. Anything you say at this point will be documented and may be used in subsequent proceedings. Within minutes, the palace courtyard was filled with senior police officials, internal affairs investigators, and palace security personnel. Inspector Morrison, a veteran officer with over 20 years of experience, arrived and immediately took control of the situation. His expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the preliminary reports and witness statements. Rodriguez, Inspector Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of disappointment and professional embarrassment, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation. You will surrender your weapon badge and identification immediately. The crowd of tourists who had been expecting a typical photo opportunity found themselves witnessing what appeared to be a real-life police drama. Several had captured the entire incident on their phones and were already uploading videos to social media with titles like Royal Guard Fights Back and SWAT Officer Gets Owned at Buckingham Palace. Detective Superintendent Sarah Collins from Professional Standards arrived and began conducting preliminary interviews with witnesses. Her reputation for thorough investigations and zero tolerance for police misconduct made Rodriguez's situation even more precarious. She approached Marcus with professional respect, clearly recognizing his actual authority and status within the security hierarchy. Captain Thompson, she said formally, I'll need a complete statement regarding this incident. Given your security clearance and current assignment, we'll handle this through appropriate classified channels while maintaining the criminal investigation. Marcus nodded and began providing a detailed account of the events, his military precision evident in how he recalled exact times, specific actions, and relevant legal statutes. His statement painted a picture of professional competence being undermined by an officer who had allowed personal stress and prejudice to override proper judgment and protocol. Meanwhile, Rodriguez stood isolated as his career crumbled around him. His SWAT team colleagues avoided eye contact, knowing that association with him could damage their own reputations. The incident would require extensive internal reviews, media management, and diplomatic explanations to prevent it from becoming an international embarrassment. The palace's head of security arrived and spoke quietly with Inspector Morrison and Detective Superintendent Collins. The conversation involved damage control measures, media protocols, and the delicate balance between maintaining public confidence in law enforcement while ensuring that justice was served for the assault against one of their officers. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor throughout the investigation process, but observers noted the slight smile that crossed his face when Rodriguez was led away in handcuffs. The SWAT officer's assumption that ceremonial guards were powerless decorations had been thoroughly and publicly disproven. The incident quickly became a case study in the importance of understanding command structures, respecting protocol, and recognizing that appearances can be deceiving. Rodriguez had learned the hard way that striking someone in a red tunic and funny hat could result in facing charges for assaulting a highly trained military officer with connections throughout the British security establishment. As the immediate crisis was contained and proper procedures initiated, Marcus prepared to resume his duties. However, the ramifications of the incident were just beginning to unfold, and the tables had turned so completely that Rodriguez would soon discover that his problems extended far beyond a simple assault charge. Within hours of the incident, the story had exploded across social media platforms worldwide. The videos captured by tourists showed the entire confrontation from multiple angles, and the footage of Rodriguez being arrested while Marcus maintained his dignity had gone viral with millions of views. News outlets picked up the story with headlines like, "Royal Guard reveals true identity after SWAT officer attack," and "Palace security scandal exposes police misconduct." The Metropolitan Police found themselves in full damage control mode as the incident threatened to undermine public confidence in law enforcement professionalism. Commissioner Williams called an emergency press conference to address the situation, while internal investigators worked around the clock to understand how such a catastrophic breach of protocol had occurred. Rodriguez sat in a holding cell, his police career effectively over and facing multiple serious charges. The assault charge was just the beginning of his legal troubles. Internal Affairs had discovered that his recent performance issues included several instances of excessive force complaints and insubordination that had been inadequately addressed by his supervisors. The Palace incident was being treated as the culmination of a pattern of misconduct rather than an isolated mistake. Marcus returned to his duties, but his role had fundamentally changed. The viral nature of the incident had blown his cover, making it impossible for him to continue covert operations while maintaining a ceremonial guard position. Palace security was forced to reassign him to more overt protection duties, though his reputation within the security community had been significantly enhanced by his professional handling of the crisis. The investigation revealed even more damaging information about Rodriguez and his unit. Detective Superintendent Collins discovered that the supposed security threat that had brought the SWAT team to the palace was based on unverified intelligence that had been improperly escalated. Rodriguez's supervisor, Sergeant Michael Barnes, had failed to follow proper verification procedures and had authorized the response to justify his unit's budget and importance within the department. The ripple effects extended throughout the Metropolitan Police hierarchy. Several supervisors who had ignored Rodriguez's previous misconduct complaints found themselves facing disciplinary action. The incident exposed systemic failures in police oversight and training that had allowed an unstable officer to operate in sensitive situations without adequate supervision or psychological evaluation. Marcus testified before multiple review boards and investigative committees, his detailed recollections and professional demeanor contrasting sharply with Rodriguez's emotional outbursts and attempts to justify his actions. The former SWAT officer's legal team struggled to mount any effective defense, as the video evidence and witness testimony clearly showed unprovoked assault against a serving military officer. The international media attention brought scrutiny to police training programs and the psychological screening of officers assigned to high-stress positions. Rodriguez's case became a textbook example of how personal problems and inadequate supervision could lead to catastrophic professional failures that damaged entire organizations. 3 months after the incident, Rodriguez was sentenced to 6 months in prison for assault, stripped of his police pension, and permanently barred from law enforcement employment. The judge's comments during sentencing emphasized that police officers must be held to higher standards, particularly when their actions threatened international diplomatic relationships and public safety. Marcus received commendations from both his military superiors and palace officials for his handling of the crisis. His restraint and professionalism had prevented the incident from escalating into something even more damaging, while his quick thinking had ensured proper documentation and legal procedures were followed. The royal family privately expressed their gratitude for his service and dedication. The palace implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from the incident. Communication procedures between different law enforcement agencies were improved, and additional training was mandated for officers who might interact with royal security personnel. The goal was to prevent future misunderstandings while maintaining the effectiveness of both ceremonial and protective operations. Rodriguez's former SWAT unit underwent complete reorganization, with new leadership and enhanced psychological screening for all members. The incident had exposed serious deficiencies in their operational procedures and supervision that required comprehensive reform. Several team members who had witnessed the assault without intervening faced disciplinary action for failing to prevent or report misconduct by a colleague. Marcus eventually transitioned to a new role as a training instructor, using his experience from the incident to educate other security personnel about maintaining professionalism under pressure and understanding the complex relationships between different law enforcement agencies. His story became part of the curriculum for royal protection training programs. The tourism industry around Buckingham Palace experienced an unexpected boost as the viral incident had increased public interest in the royal guards and their actual roles in security operations. Visitors came hoping to see the famous guard who had stood up to police misconduct, though Marcus had been reassigned to less visible positions to allow the attention to fade. 1 year later, Rodriguez was working as a security guard at a shopping mall. His law enforcement career permanently ended by a moment of poor judgment and uncontrolled anger. His attempts to appeal his conviction and restore his police credentials had been repeatedly rejected, as the evidence of his misconduct was overwhelming and undeniable. The incident served as a lasting reminder that assumptions about people based on their appearance or role could lead to serious consequences. Rodriguez had assumed that a ceremonial guard would be powerless to respond to mistreatment, while Marcus had demonstrated that dignity, training, and professionalism could triumph over abuse of authority. Marcus occasionally reflected on the incident and how a single moment had changed multiple lives and careers. His decision to maintain his composure and follow proper procedures had vindicated his training and values, while Rodriguez's choice to resort to violence and intimidation had destroyed everything he had worked to achieve in law enforcement. The palace courtyard returned to its normal routine of tourists and ceremonial duties, but security personnel at all levels maintained heightened awareness of the importance of mutual respect and proper protocols. The viral video remained online as a permanent reminder that actions have consequences, and that sometimes the person who appears powerless may hold all the real authority. The tables had indeed turned completely, transforming a moment of